Hi, it's Sam Cook, and welcome back to another episode of the Ukraine Military History Podcast. This is part two of a two-part conversation. The first episode was a couple episodes back, our first release of the analytical series on the current war, which is the first draft of history by Rob Lee and his colleague Dmytro Putiata. So this conversation continues where they left off, where they talked about the big reforms that Ukraine has made to stabilize the line, why 2026 is looking better and better. If you can go back and listen to that whole episode. But this episode also goes into what exactly is the front line evolving into, because this is constantly changing. What is the kill zone? How big is that kill zone now? It's been expanding from just a couple kilometers to 5, 10, 15, even 20 kilometers now on the front lines. And how is Russia and Ukraine adapting to this new battlefield reality? And what are the prognosis for 2026? They also look back at one of the last big scares on the front line for Ukraine, a major breakthrough at Dobropillia, and how Ukraine dealt with that and what lessons they learned from this. So this is the second in a two-part series, again, of the current analytical situation filmed as of May 2026. This first draft of history from our top Ukraine war analysts, Rob Lee and Dima, who both obviously are here in Kiev, go to the front lines regularly. They'll be doing future episodes like this. Rob's actually going out to the front line, and we'll be back to record some more episodes in June of 2026 about the current situation. So I look forward to you soaking in the second part of this series, understanding the first draft of history with our top Ukraine military history war analysts, Rob Lee and Dima. Before we start this episode, I just wanted to make a quick word to mention our sponsors. I'm going to give you a brief introduction for our sponsors, and then at the end of the show, we'll do a longer discussion about each sponsor and what we're offering so that you can get right into the content. So this podcast is funded by the Borderlands Foundation. The Borderlands Foundation is a foundation that I established to make sure Ukraine's heroes are never forgotten. And we have two main centers that are, in effect, the sponsor for this podcast. The first center is the Ukraine Military History Institute. It's an English-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking center, which is, our mission is to translate Ukraine's history from Ukrainian into English for the world to consume and learn from. Ukraine has a lot of allies who've supported it. Almost all of them, the common language of military officers, military historians, and professionals is English. So the Ukraine Military History Institute created and sponsors this. And I'll tell you all about our programs and how you can support the Institute at the end of the episode. The second sponsor for this podcast is the Ukraine Center for Traumatic Stress. This is also part of the Borderlands Foundation. It's a center dedicated to research and raising awareness and helping to bring in to Ukraine cutting edge therapies, treatments, protocols, and education related to post-traumatic stress disorder. The heroes of Ukraine that are fighting this war, whether they're Ukrainians or foreigners who've come in to fight side by side with Ukrainians, they're writing this history, which creates the stories, which creates a strong future country. And those memories have costs, so we're dedicated to helping advance the research, treatment, and breakthrough that all soldiers, veterans can have dealing with and overcoming post-traumatic stress disorder and mental health that arises from their service. And then finally, our last sponsor is the Borderlands Group. This is a for-profit company that donates the money to fund the Borderlands Foundation and all of our programs. I'm also the founder and president of that organization. And we do military advisory for defense companies working inside Ukraine, and consulting and software development and technical work for both governments and military defense companies. So with that, that's our sponsors. At the end of the podcast, I'm going to tell you a lot more about each sponsor if you're looking for ways that you can contribute to the Borderlands Foundation, our two centers, or if you'd like to work with myself, Rob, and other contributors for this podcast. I'll talk to you about how you can get in touch with us through the Borderlands Group for that.
I'll come back to this Ukrainian drone line, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You mentioned that we're gonna build, we had this idea to build kill zone 0-15 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
No doubts. But the point is that, well, I was a part of the Brigades who was part of this initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that no one told us what does it mean and how to create this.
Right.
I mean, no one knew it. I mean, okay, you have this nice 2 English words. Kill zone, fine, sounds great. It seems like that okay, you're gonna destroy artillery here, suppress their logistics. Sounds logical, fine. But how to do this? How to implement? What kind of drones to use? What is the better way to use it?
Right.
And the point is that we still don't have it. The point is that those unmanned system brigade, they're fighting their own wars based on experience of their brigade, regiment, or whatever, battalion's commander.
Right.
It's a big issue. While Russians try to create something, unfortunately we didn't, at least for the last year. And what Russians forgot, and maybe one of the reasons they failed near Kupiansk, is that they divided the areas of responsibility, which is absolutely righteous way of doing, but only for reconnaissance and striking. What they missed is areas of responsibility of detection and interception, because you need to combine electronic warfare, radars, interceptor crews, which and software, which is, well, right now they have it, but still last year they didn't have it. And in that case, you may say, okay, I am able to do strikes and I'm able to protect our forces. They didn't do it. Not sure that we are able to do it right now. I mean, at least due to this some kind of structure,
Right.
because it's developing. But the point is that even if it's developing, which is absolutely understandable, you still need to have something, and then you need to approbate, use it, and see, okay, this was wrong, this was good, this thing was absolutely right from our side, we need to scale it. I think Russians are doing this. This year, I think we will see drone line version 2.0, where they will include this interceptor system and maybe to divide this areas of responsibility a little bit in a different way. And the point is that even due to the structure of Ukrainian brigade, we have like drone company in a lot of cases, drone company per battalion and separate UAV battalion per brigade. It allows you to strike quite deep. I mean, you don't need to have SBS, Ukrainian forces or anything like that. You just need to have proper financial support and human resources inside of these maneuver brigades. Because if your maneuver battalion has UGV platoon, US UAV company, also interceptor crews, it means that your battalion is autonomous and does not require help even from this UAV battalion and the brigade command. While your UAV battalion and the brigade command should focus on deeper strikes with like Ukrainian darts, with American Hornet, with Ukrainian D3, D4 kind of drones and other type of drones. But instead of that, we have something on paper, and we asking for the support for this unmanned system force brigades, which is a little bit weird and not really, in my humble opinion, the right way of doing it.
And this is one of the, again, this is one of the key kind of considerations, and it's really important also for foreign militaries that want to learn from this war about,
absolutely.
you know, what structural changes make sense. And I think it's important to keep in mind why I explain to people outside. I'm like, unmanned systems forces is a branch. I think it makes sense to Ukraine in some respects.
In some respects, maybe much lower, but yeah.
I have a mixed view. I think it made sense in that you need somewhere to develop kind of drone capabilities. You need to make a priority. You need a hub for R&D, other things, right? As a separate branch that has like operational level concerns, I don't know it's as beneficial in that respect. And there's a lot of redundancy you see in Ukraine, with where you have a lot of units doing deep strike, a lot of units doing naval drones, and it's a lot of things where the competition is not always as helpful. I think it'd be more efficient elsewhere. But I do think it makes some sense in that, you know, for Western militaries, you know, U.S. military is obviously a very strong air component. It has a lot of other capabilities that are unique. Drones should be part of this, but it should be seen as, here is a thing that complements existing capabilities, right? It's not something that like this is going to change everything right away. I don't think we need to look at it that way. I don't think we should procure drones for the sake of procuring drones. We procure them when it makes our units more lethal, more effective, more flexible, right? And how that looks for the U.S. military is going to be different for the Ukrainian military. Many of Ukraine's structural adaptations have happened since 2023. So when Ukraine's been on the defense basically this entire time, strategically on the defense, obviously they've had some offensive operations. So many brigades are, in the drone kind of, era have been basically on defense. Adaptations have been for a defensive military. And, a lot of Almanz's forces is really focused on, the plans are well known, but basically killing as many Russians as possible, inflicting, unsustainable losses until Russia just cannot, continue the war, essentially, right? That's not always tied to maneuver, though. Whereas the U.S. military, everything is fires by itself is never the purpose. It's always fires plus maneuver. How does it enable maneuver? And a lot of Ukrainian, units and operations, it's more about we're going to try to kill as many Russians as possible, and there may not be any maneuver component to it. Which again, as part of the strategy of this war, that makes sense, but it would not necessarily make sense for other militaries. But also, in some cases, some units got moved to one direction for bureaucratic reasons, for political reasons. There's always internal jockeying between different kind of branches of the military that one wants to be stronger than another one, and so they create redundant capabilities. And for deep strike, again, like you have HOR, you have SBU, you have unmanned systems forces, all doing deep strike. There's multiple units in unmanned systems forces doing deep strike,
and middle strike,
and middle strike. SO is also doing deep strike.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll find new things doing deep strike later because everyone wants to be involved in it, right? Because again, and it makes sense. Everyone wants to have a role in undermining Russia's potential to wage the war, but it would be much more efficient probably have one organization dedicated to this mission.
Fully agree with you, because right now everyone is doing what he thinks is right, what looks sexy, because all refineries are burning. It looks nice, but no one is asking about the efficiency and how it was implemented. So I think that a big lesson for NATO and outside NATO countries is to, first of all, to learn as much as possible what Ukraine and Russia are doing, and then to think how to implement something from that war into their armies. Because this war showed and taught us that you can fight not just with 200 grand HIMARS missile.
Right.
You can have much more cheaper drones, and they will do the same. And it requires kind of to think a lot about how you're going to fight in the future. And through this year, I got this idea that drones definitely should be part of the ecosystem, not something like a separate one. And it's like, if you have modern aviation, not like Ukrainian, Soviet, post-Soviet or whatever,
right.
It should be also some capabilities for aviation where they do combined strikes against the targets, where those so-called deep strike drones will be the part of this system, which will be combined with missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and will hit one target more effectively, and will destroy not just target, for example. So this is one of the key things for Western just other countries to understand how to use drones as part of their ecosystem together alongside with artillery, tanks, and etc. Because drones are not absolute.
Right.
We have this, unfortunately, we have just two totally different but let's say diplomatically wrong views, where drones will destroy and do everything, and where drones, this is like for not developed countries where we're going to fight in a different way. I absolutely agree with the fact that other countries, other nations will fight in a different way. Sure. But the point is that you cannot, in my opinion, right now, ignore drones, detection, and protection from it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing this in Lebanon now with the Israeli Defense Forces, having difficulty with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah FPV teams are, they're
not like, even close to what
they're operating like 2023 level of Ukrainian and Russian kind of FPV teams, probably, right? So far less sophisticated, in terms of quality, quantity, training experience, and it's demonstrating that the IDF is having problems, and if they're having problems, I think it's pretty safe to say a lot of NATO militaries would have the same problems too.
Yeah,
and we see this in training exercises when Ukrainian teams go and operate with NATO countries. All right. I want to get back on schedule kind of because we got on a bunch of tangents, but I want to make 2 points though. One is when we talk about structural changes that are relevant, I think it's really important to keep in mind too, is that if both sides are creating counter UAS teams. And by counter UAS teams, this is the wrong terminology. I'm not just saying teams that destroy, intercept UAVs, but teams that hunt down opposing UAV teams, right?
Okay.
And so Rubicon was doing this, right? And Ukraine has companies doing this too. But right now, the focus is to give them, UAS capabilities. So it's kind of drone on drone. But in many cases, artillery is actually maybe the most effective or one of the most effective things, as well as, aviation, right? To knock out these positions, because drones are effective, but many drones struggle to really penetrate blindages, bunkers, so on. You need something heavier. And there is a question of whether or not, if you want to create a unit like a company in a brigade, right, just for countering UAV teams, like hunting UAV teams, it probably needs to be a combination of like ISR, some kind of strike, right, FPV, maybe bomber, and then maybe like 1 or 2 howitzers, right? And the combination effects is the ideal way of really countering UAV teams. But that is a structural change that I think will come slowly, but like it is interesting how to think through this.
Yeah, it's like combined arms, good morning. Nothing happened, just a drone appeared as an extra tool, as like extra opportunity and extra threat. But yeah, I fully agree. It's like, when I was a battle captain during last summer, I had to counter Russian howitzers. And the problem is that if you use only drones against howitzer, even if it's like a simple 1-2, well, good morning, but they're able to shut down. They're able to jam it. They're able to create a protection. And the point is that I had to use artillery quite a lot. And only together with artillery, it was the most efficient way to destroy or successfully suppress Russian artillery. Not just drones or not just artillery. For me, we usually use like from 6 to 8 rounds, which is not a lot, but with the help of ISR, you show all the shells that kind of detonated near the target, the correct, they did mass, as artillerymen do it. And we literally use drones, different types of drones, high explosive, cumulative ammo,
right,
just to destroy the critical system of the artillery piece. And the same with drone operators. They can have nets, they can have electronic warfare, they can shut down, they can intercept your fiber drone with another drone or whatever. You cannot rely only on drones, at least right now, or just only on artillery. Right now we have a lot of, as I said, capabilities and threats. So you need to understand how to use them properly and effectively.
Right. I agree. And okay, I'm gonna go back to what we were doing before a little bit to try and keep us on track, kind of, because we went on tangents. Good tangents, but okay. So all right, let's go back to 2025, right? So I think Dobropillia in August is an important case study on what's going to happen this year when we look at what happened last year in Dobropillia, right? And so August 2025, maybe the most serious moment on the battlefield last year, I think. The Russians had a really deep infiltration. It was east of Dobropillia, where they made it, I think in some cases 18 kilometers or more past the front line. And in some cases they're just walking for like 3 or 4 days, just walking kind of the whole time. Some groups, I think that the deepest they got was to Petrivka, this little village right north of the road between Kramatorsk and Dobropillia. Some Russian soldiers also got within 3 kilometers of Dobropillia itself, so they got pretty close to the city. And it was a really significant moment. It got a lot of attention because Deep State did this update where they showed like this is the bunny ears, where it was like a really significant change, and created a big kind of media effect and so on. And I went down the area like a week or 2 afterwards, kind of try to find out what happened. Basically, I think what happened that summer is kind of emblematic of challenges Ukraine had in 2025. So there was a new brigade that had been in this direction for some time, and that brigade had been pushed back kind of pretty consistently in this time, and it was difficult for Ukraine's defenses to kind of hold because this is the weak point line. And one of the issues that happened in 2024, 2025, Ukraine built a bunch of new brigades. When they got deployed, for different reasons, they had issues of their initial combat experience. Sometimes the commanders were guys who had come from like Tesaka or other places that did not have combat experience. They did not have the drone component because it was not a part of the TO&E, right? So they deployed, but a lot of brigades, maybe half the drones they get are from, nonprofits, charities, so on. These new brigades had none of that support because they just didn't have the background. And when they deployed, they lacked a lot of the drone component. Some of them had some big AWOL issues before this. And when they deployed initially, they had some real big issues of coordinating, of fighting, of how to do this. They got thrown into the fight, I think, way too early sometimes. In other cases, as a brigade was forming, they'd form one battalion. That battalion would then be attached to some other brigade because he needed to kind of respond to what was going on in 2024. And so the formation of the brigades was often quite kind of flawed, and they had some big issues. And so what happened to Dobropillia, I think, is kind of emblematic of some of these challenges. So that one of the brigades was struggling. They kept getting pushed back. Ukraine pulled another brigade to replace it. That brigade had fought most of the war piecemeal. So as different battalions, and the battalions had done very well. Like they respected kind of battalions, but they'd not operated cohesively as a brigade.
Oh, okay.
And one of the issues, and this is also an issue of what happened in 2024, is that quite often when Russians would advance in one direction, Ukraine would pull up a battalion or company from brigade, send it to a different part of the front line, and attach it to a different brigade. And it's created all sorts of problems because this brigade would kind of abuse that battalion because it's not their own. They want to kind of save their own battalions. And of course, it go in a different part of the front line. They don't know the people. They don't know how to coordinate very well, right? Piecemeal deployments are just generally kind of a problem. And so this brigade, where the deep infiltration happened, or part of it happened, basically what I had heard was that when they came back to fight as a cohesive brigade, they had some real challenges because they just not done this. They'd always fought kind of as separate battalions, and then fighting together as a brigade, they had some real challenges initially. Or coordination issues. There's also some big adjacent unit problems, right? And this has also been a consistent issue where brigades don't always talk to each other properly. There isn't necessarily coordination between each other. And the last one, which is an issue I think that's been a problem for a while, is that when there are issues, brigades won't always acknowledge what's happening, right? So if they lose a position, commanders at different levels will get relieved if they lose positions. And so, or in some cases, they'll be ordered to counterattack to retake a position. They lost it because they don't have enough people, and then counterattacking is just not going to succeed. And so sometimes commanders have gotten into the habit of not acknowledging losing a position because either they don't want to get relieved, or they don't want to kind of turn down a counterattack order they know is not going to succeed. And so this has become a problem where two units, adjacent units, want to lose a position. That adjacent unit will get attacked from the side where they thought they had friendlies, and they'll be like, what's going on here? And that's kind of an issue that happened before. And some of the Russian advances in 2024, like some of the towns that they kind of advanced in, this is one of the problems that happened. But basically, you had these internal issues, and I think this might have been a contributing factor to some extent during this thing too. And so anyway, infiltration happens. Ultimately, I think the Russians were surprised. I think they got further than they thought they would. They didn't have a force to exploit it. They did get a lot of guys through. I think what I was told was like maybe 250, 300 guys, a week or later were in this area. They didn't bring up armor though. They weren't able to bring up capabilities, and they'd kind of moved beyond the range in which UAVs could support them, right? And so then when Ukraine kind of responded, Ukraine brigades who responded brought up armor. So 93rd Mechanized Brigade, they had to pull the reconnaissance battalion. They also pulled up a lot of UGVs and used UGVs in a kind of offensive way. But a lot of the counterattack was tanks because again, it was 20 kilometers from what the front line had been, and so Russia did infiltrate Mavic teams with them, but they were not bringing up FPV teams the same way, Molniya teams, so on. And so tanks could operate again effectively, and they did a good job, right? And tanks can still be quite effective when you set conditions. 93rd Brigade also used UGVs in offensive ways. They bring up UGVs with machine guns, and basically because they couldn't pull their own battalions off the front lines to respond, send a UGV into a village first, and then if any Russians shoot at the UGV, you can then kill them with UAVs. It's kind of like a movement to contact essentially. Some of the UGVs were used to kind of try and burn down tree lines where they thought Russians were, so they could you kind of drop gasoline, light it on fire with a tracer.
Yeah, not bad.
Interesting kind of new tactics. But the response was, so Ukraine redeployed first Azov Corps. So the Corps took over responsibility for the sector. They redeployed a bunch of unmanned systems forces units that were there, special operations units, some assault units, so on. And so Ukraine was able to stabilize it and then basically to push back Russia across this kind of area, right? I think it was important because it showed the problems that Ukraine had faced before. It showed that Ukraine was still able to hold it once they reinforced. And then after this kind of infiltration occurred, this became Russia's big plan for 2025, right? So they pulled all the naval infantry brigades, almost all of them, from Sumy, from Kherson, they focused in that one direction. Naval infantry brigades also had, like, in some cases 90% of their equipment still remaining. So I'm way above what was normally the case. And they redeployed a bunch of Rubicon units too. All right, so Rubicon, it was like Rubicon, I think Dnipro was there, Rubicon Center, Rubicon 7, 8, I think Rubicon Distance Mining was there, PVO. So basically, Rubicon reinforced Sector 2. And so basically, Russia made this big priority and again, we know the operational goal was to encircle Slavyansk Kramatorsk, right? So come from Liman, then come from Dobropillia, and try and connect in Bodronkova. And so this is the big for the success. And Center Group of Forces also had a significant amount of assets applied. So it was also 8th Combined Arms Army was part of Center Group of Forces, even though it's typically part of Southern Military District. 68th Army Corps was also attached to it as well. So it's a really big priority of FPV teams, of Rubicon, of naval infantry, right, so on. And yet, it didn't succeed. And I think this is one of the more important kind of things to talk about for 2026. And it didn't succeed for a few different reasons. One of the reasons is that when the naval infantry got redeployed, 51st Combined Arms Army lied to the naval infantry and told them where the front line was. Yeah, very classic kind of problem the Russian military still has. So there's a village called Dobropillia, northeast of Dobropillia, and during this kind of deep infiltration, the Russians got near Dobropillia, but didn't hold it. And of course, when the naval infantry guys redeployed in like September, October, the bunny ears had been cut off by Ukrainian units, and so you still had a pocket there, but it was kind of cut off. The front line really was kind of down by Novotoretsk area. And so the naval infantry guys were told Rubizhny was held by 51st Combined Arms Army. The real front line was like maybe 10 kilometers away.
Okay.
And so the first mechanized assault, they were told completely kind of wrong direction, and the first assault was defeated, quite easily by UAVs and so on. But the lying was a big contributing factor here, where they didn't know where the front line was. They were deployed, and the infantry lost a lot of people in this initial assault, right? Which they couldn't afford to kind of lose. And so that was a big kind of contributing factor. But I think in general, it's just, when Ukraine deployed its own reinforcements, its unmanned systems forces units, its best drone units, its other kind of capabilities, and Russia did the same, it demonstrated that Ukraine can still hold, right? This was not sufficient for Russia to overcome those defenses, and the kind of their approach of last year of reinforce the Rubicon, deploy our best naval infantry units. This combination did not lead to success, and I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind for 2026. That I think a breakthrough is not particularly likely this year for Russia. I think they tried it. I think the best chance for this was last year. It didn't succeed. And there are some, some different reasons why the situation I think is better for Ukraine now. And so that's why I think, maybe a breakthrough is less likely. And Dobropillia is a useful case study in examining kind of what went wrong for Ukraine. Some of those things have been, I think, fixed or improved upon. And then some of the Russian issues I think are still there.
Yeah. Like when Russians captured Avdiivka in 2024, I noticed how they, at a kind of strategic level, how they changed their approach. They were quite easily to take their forces from one direction and to move them to another. They had this, like adaptivity to the situation that they didn't have before. And it seems like, at least from my perspective, when they managed to break through this Dobropillia direction, they didn't plan it initially to make it. It seems like that they have this, like tactics of infiltration. And if it goes, it goes. It seems like this is how I see it, that maybe for this critical, maybe 1 week, maybe 5 days, maybe 10 days, and for this critical period of time, they even didn't believe that it happened.
Right.
So it seems like that it took them too much time to redeploy those kind of fresh forces, fully equipped with manpower and vehicles, to deploy them from Kursk, Sumy, and as I said, from Kherson direction to Dobropillia. They literally lost this time opportunity. And I think it's one of the reasons they fail. And you mentioned that they're lying. Well, yeah, quite a lot. This, like they have this kind of way of approaching where they kind of say, okay, we already captured those villages, for example, but they did not. And they are telling their superior commands that, yeah, we hold position in these villages. So superior command say, okay, if you hold these villages, you need to advance from these villages to that direction and to that direction.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Yeah, sure. And then Russian division commanders think, okay, if I need to advance from these villages, but I'm not there, maybe firstly I literally need to do it to capture that. Then they go trying to capture it, and they're failing and die. And the problem is that it seems like this Russian superior command, they do not really understand what kind of forces right now they operate. And the quality of these forces is, in a lot of cases, in terms of infantry, is not as it used to be years ago. I mean, same with Ukraine. That's kind of unfortunately natural way of doing during the wartime. So you have this degradation, but it seems like that the perception of the war from Russian generals, it's far from the reality. They do not really understand how it's going right now on the ground.
Right.
That's why they tell them, okay, you need to capture this, tree line till 31st of May.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do it.
Right.
So battalion regiment commander, he understands, okay, it's not doable, but I was forced. And they train to do it, and they suffer a lot of losses because of that.
Yeah.
They don't have proper planning, they don't have reconnaissance, they don't have concentration of fire.
Right.
That's why it seems like they are not able to break through.
And that's, it's lying is a problem in both militaries.
Yeah.
I think it's a bigger problem in the Russian military, but it is a problem in the Ukrainian military too. But, in these cases, so, this is one example of how lying created a big problem. And after that happened, 51st Combined Arms Army commander was relieved. So they has like an FSB investigation about what happened. They fired him. But ultimately, it comes from the top, right? This is Putin consistently gives the military unreasonable objectives, right? I mean, obviously from the beginning, but even now, it's they get demands that are just unreasonable. And then generals down below the command, they basically have to execute those orders. So say, yes, like we'll do this. And then as the orders go down the command, right, they have a timeline. If you don't meet that timeline, you'll get replaced. And so you incentivize guys to lie. As you said, they take villages on credit. They say, oh, we took this village. They didn't take it. Or it incentivizes the kind of flag showing things where either drone drops a flag to show they took someone, or they send guys forward who are going to be killed just to plant a flag, have a Mavic show it, and then the guys get killed, they don't hold anything. And so they're unnecessarily losing people. But also, in order to overcome Ukraine's defenses, you have to do proper planning, right? And it's true on both sides, right? Both sides, if you want to do an offensive that succeeds, you have to take time, do a deliberate plan, find a weak point on the line, degrade the defenses there for a period of time, and then have, I do rehearsals, do some kind of cohesive training, and then you have to have very good execution. And Ukraine, there's criticisms of assault units. So sometimes they do counterattacks before those conditions are there, and they lose people because they have not set conditions for using armor. Russians do that all the time too. And again, in the case of the infantry, some of these assaults, naval infantry weren't even doing suppression. I mean, it was just really significant failures. And I think it's a big command kind of issue for them. But I think this is still a really significant vulnerability for Russia, where their adjacent unit coordination also is quite bad. So in Kupiansk, you had two Russian regiments. One was in the city, one was north of the city. Those two regiments were not talking to each other. And so when Ukraine did its counterattack, the regiment that was getting pushed back north of the city did not tell the guys in the city anything was happening. And then suddenly the guys in the city start getting killed, and they're like, "What's happening? We didn't see this coming." But it is a vulnerability where Ukraine can do offensive operations, and if they attack between a seam of two units, the two units are probably not talking very well. They're probably lying to each other, and it creates kind of real kind of vulnerabilities. So I think it's a really significant thing. But I think so. Like talking all about 2025, right? We come back and try and kind of put it back to where we are now. So Russia's approach, right? Infiltration, development of Rubicon, kind of improved, drone employment, kind of, the drone line initiative, like really kind of understanding that drones are a kind of key part of this war. That led to a faster rate of advance 2025 to 2024, right? And I forget the numbers exactly, but they advanced faster rate. Did not achieve a breakthrough, but they are taking kind of more Ukrainian territory as you go. So we get to this winter, right? And again, like last November, October, Russia, they got into Pokrovsk, right? They had the battle for Pokrovsk, Mirogorod, right? They've taken both cities essentially at this point. We get to 2026, right? So seasonal dimension. Russia typically advances slower in the winter than they do in summertime. And so now we're approaching summer. The seasonal changes, weather changes should kind of provide a greater advantage to Russian offensive operations than the winter does. But I do think the reasons why I think I'm more optimistic now than last year this time, and why I think Russia's going to advance, have more difficulty advancing this year than last year, is that there's a number of things that are different, right? So Ukraine has adapted to infiltration, right? So brigades know how to deal with infiltration. They've repurposed reconnaissance units. They've repurposed SOF and so on to kind of focus on counter-infiltration, right? Infantry know that you're going to have guys behind you. You can still hold your position as long as you're being resupplied properly. Ukraine has developed a logistics system for UGVs, UAVs that can sustain infantry even with infiltration. Ukraine has also learned to deal with Rubicon, right? So they learn to deal with, strikes behind the front line, deal with the kill zone. You got to walk a certain amount, how to do logistics, so on. They've figured that out. They figured out how to maintain your UAV capabilities even as you're getting targeted, right? So the Russians are targeted with cabs, artillery, so on. So for all those reasons, I think Russia's approach, their approach in 2025 was an improvement over 2024, but did not lead to success, or not like significant success. Now the question is, what is Russia going to do this year? Because if they keep applying the same approach, you're going to see diminishing returns most likely, right? And I think they have to adapt in some way. And as you said before, right, 155th Naval Infantry Division is determined infiltration is not achieving the results they need. They need to go back to using armor. But for armor, you need to set conditions for using armor. And it's not impossible. Although it is a big question, can Russia do it at this point, right? Given issues with lying, with unrealistic political objectives, with an inability to coordinate, adjacent unit problems, kind of command and control issues, can they actually set conditions to, sufficiently degrade, suppress Ukrainian UAV positions on a certain part of the front line to enable maneuver, right? And also part of maneuver too involves you really need interceptor teams that are effective. And you have to use interceptors as kind of like offensive counter-air.
I fully agree. Same with other type of drone operators, or at least other kind of capabilities to launch drones. Right now, with technologies, you are able to launch drones from Kyiv, and you will take part in this maneuver offensive. Just, I don't know, like you put a box, you open the box, and FPVs are started flying. It's doable. We will see a lot of things like that, I think, quite soon. So, yeah, I'm also quite optimistic. We will see as we said today multiple times, a lot of good presence for us, for Western society. Yeah, and we will show that maneuvers are possible during this deadlock drone warfare situation.
Right. So yeah, I think there are two kind of main factors that influence the battlefield, right? There's the relative manpower situation, and then the kind of relative like drone employment maybe situation, right? So for manpower, this has been Ukraine's big challenge for a while, right? We know that brigades are undermanned. They're well below kind of table organization strength. There's not enough, infantry. There's not enough, people in different positions. When Fedorov took over as Minister of Defense, he mentioned publicly that there was like 200,000 people who were AWOL in the military, like 2 million people who were avoiding mobilization. This remains the big challenge of, there's a significant number of people going AWOL every month. We know this. Mobilization, the numbers have increased than they were a year ago, but obviously a significant number of people go AWOL and desert from the training centers right away. Other people desert because they get exhausted and they don't get rotated. I would say, though, I think what we've seen recently, though, is that there's been a slight positive development in the manpower situation at the front, where brigades are still undermanned, but I think they've increased their numbers slightly, right? And it's the first time we've seen improvement in a long time in the war for the manpower side for Ukraine. And I think on the Russian side, so Russia still has a lot of people, and the plan for this year is I think they recruit like 409,000 people. I think that's what Hoover kind of said.
Yeah.
And last 3 years, they exceeded their quotas, right? They recruited more than 400,000. I think last year was I think it was around the same number, and they met the
close to that, quite close to that.
And they met the quota in the beginning of December, right? So they succeeded. Thus far this year, they're having issues though, right? And so they're not exceeding the numbers so far. Obviously, we know a lot of people will volunteer because of significant financial benefits, right? Which is like money that a lot of people can never see otherwise in small towns. Many people also get coerced in serving. So either prisoners get kind of coerced into serving, or police are giving quotas of a certain number of people they want to get, contracts per month. They're incentivized financially to do this, but they can also go to people and kind of just say like, okay, like we're going to put you in jail for something. We're going to make up a charge, or you can sign a contract, and they kind of coerce them to serve in. So that's still a kind of key component. I think they want to recruit like 20,000 foreigners as well. They're probably not going to make that quota this year. They're probably have more problems, I think, recruiting foreigners now. But Russia traditionally has met their numbers. I think thus far they're struggling to meet the number. But I think when we talk about the relative situation, I think this year they're probably going to have more difficulty recruiting the numbers they had in previous years. They can still do offensive operations. They're still going to get more people than Ukraine will, I think. But Russia depends on a kind of significant manpower advantage to really advance, right? And if that advantage decreases, then the rate of advance is probably going to decrease as well. They could probably do offensives in fewer directions at a time, less likely to achieve a breakthrough, and probably create some other kind of issues. Do you think that's kind of roughly the right kind of way of looking at it?
Yeah, I agree, because if this recruitment system, this recruitment campaign that they have right now continues in the same pace they have it right now, till the end of the year, they will have a gap like from 15 till 17%. So it's going to be like the first year that they didn't manage to recruit the needed amount of people. And this recruitment is needed also to fulfill gaps that was kind of provided by the losses during the fights. And you also need to create and reform new units for that. So I think they will face these issues. We already mentioned today that they have a problem with recruiting students. Apart from that, they have problems right now with recruiting.
And for students, it's a 1-year contract to join unmanned systems forces.
Yeah,
allegedly 1 year, because everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, kind of 1 year, but it sounds quite not bad, because you're going to be a millionaire. I mean,
it's very lucrative financially.
Yeah, I mean, it was rubles, but still millionaire.
Yeah, but the idea is people who are in university take 1 year out of university, come back. Now, everyone else who signs a contract, you are in the military until the war ends, basically.
I think so.
They say there's a different deal for these guys. They probably have a good reason not to believe this is the case, but some of them have signed up. But you said the numbers are far below what they are hoping for. And in particular, they need to get talent. They need to get the technologically savvy Russians, young Russians, to serve in these units. If they don't get it, they're just not going to have the same innovation level, right? It's just not possible.
As Ukrainians have. Yeah.
You were talking about units being formed. What units did they try and form last year, and what units are trying to form this year, and how did that go?
Well, for the last year, they kind of trying to mostly reform existing units from brigades or from regiments into divisions. In 80%, 85%, they failed to do that because of huge losses, despite the fact that they managed to fulfill the quota of the recruitment, but they still did manage to do these reforms.
It is typically to elevate a brigade to a division, right? That's for the most part. Also, there are 3 corps they want to make. Armies.
Mostly from Leningrad military district to make them combine arms, which also requires quite a lot of resources. And unfortunately for us, Russians are not doing the same mistakes that we do. They had a chance. Okay, we plan to do this, so we need to do this. But no, they face the problem with any amount of personnel. So they said, okay, we're not able to do this. We're not doing this. Ukraine, unfortunately, seems like they would do on the counter. Okay, we plan to create 5 maneuver brigades. We need to do that. And no one cares whether those maneuver brigades have like 20-30% of personnel and needed equipment.
Right.
Fine, we create a brigade. Russians didn't do it, unfortunately. For this year, they have a little bit small appetite in terms of reforming, but personally for me, it was very interesting to see that they're gonna rechange the most elite VDV division, or in general division, the 76. That is the part of Leningrad military district. It's gonna be assault corps.
No, Army Corps. Air Assault Corps.
Air Assault Corps. All those regiments that right now in divisions will be transformed into brigades. Brigade will consist of like 3 battalions, UAV battalion. I mean, also UAV companies per battalions.
Right.
They're gonna also create reconnaissance brigade,
Mhm.
artillery brigade.
Mm.
Also will form a UAV regiment. So it's gonna be quite. If they manage to do this, it's gonna be quite efficient and strong unit.
So it's interesting that both naval infantry and VDV are being scaled, right? So the naval infantry last year, they scaled 155th and 336 brigades into the 155th and 122nd. Sorry, 120.
Yeah, 120.
120th divisions. Now there's not divisions, right? They're actually just they have one regiment essentially with things. So I think they're probably like 4,000 to 5,000, strong.
Yeah. I mean, despite the fact that it's only one regiment, but this regiment, for example, in 5 division is like 4K personnel.
Yeah.
Which is more than average regiment, but still it's definitely not a division.
Right.
It's one regiment. So the question is, what was the point of doing this?
Right.
I don't really understand.
But in this year, they want to scale 61st and
Yes.
810th into divisions too, right?
The 40th.
40th, okay.
40th
Okay.
and this 61st division.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they will be able to do it. Maybe it's going to be again one regiment division.
Right.
I don't know.
But it's interesting. So naval infantry is being scaled, and then VDV also. So VDV now, they already scaled, brigades into divisions, right? So they have two brigades still, right? It was 11th and 83rd, because was it 31st became 104th division?
Yes.
So that already happened, and then they're continuing to scale other components to it. Right now, the VDV has the 20th Unmanned Systems Forces Battalion as organic to VDV. As you said, they're trying to scale up as well and creating their own kind of capability.
I think it's going to be a brigade, brigade in the future.
Most likely.
And they're scaling this, the 36 separate assault regiment is going to be another VDV division, which I know I think it's pointless. It's like way too much. They have so much VDV components that they're not able to transport via helicopters or planes. So but just a brand,
Well, I mean, again, it's a question of eliteness, right? Then again, it is a question of to what extent is VDV naval infantry more elite than regular units at this point. There's some question there. I think it's probably an element of it to it, but it's interesting to see though because they are a very key way of viewing the Russian military, what the Russian military views of future warfare, like what's useful, what should we be scaling, so on, what capabilities do we need. So naval infantry obviously they're spread out across the country. So every fleet has naval infantry component. And so they're scaling those. VDV is also the kind of quick reaction force, strategic force for the Russian military. So I think that's quite notable. So I'll get back to the UAS side. So let me a second. Let me look through my notes. So anyway, manpower side we kind of covered, right? The second I think key factor on the battlefield is really just UAS and drone kind of employment, right? And as a relative thing, it's hard. There's tactical, operational, strategic, so on. One of the reasons why I'm more optimistic now is that I think Ukraine has not just kind of maintained, but kind of increased the upper hand on UAS, right? And so middle strike is probably the best example. I think deep strike, the quantities are increasing for Ukraine, right? So Russia's had this advantage at the beginning of the war. Ukraine is increasingly kind of pushing in there too. In some cases, maybe almost quantitatively launching more drones, deep strike drones in some months. We know there's some missiles that are being developed, like some are Ukrainian missiles. There are also some kind of like foreign missiles or drone missiles, so on. I think that part's developing quite well. Middle strike is maybe the most kind of important development I think in this realm, right? Because Russia, so they've been using Goran drones for operational strikes too, right? So so some of them are strategic strikes done by the general staff. Some are operational strikes done by the group.
Also tactical.
Yes.
They also use ground type drones against, for example, drone operator positions.
Yeah,
they're doing this.
And so they've had that advantage for a while, right? And it supplements the glide bombs. So that's always been an advantage too. But Ukraine never has had a full kind of solution for that. And then of course, when with Molnia, with BM-35, this became another issue when they started putting Starlink on them, right? And this created this really big challenge in January when with Molnia, you had this very cheap operational drone kind of capability, and Russia started going out to the main road from Pavlograd to Petropavlovka. They started knocking out, just regular trucks. But this became a really big threat in January. If Russia can, scale operational depth strikes, it's going to be a big problem for Ukraine logistics. Now, of course, Starlink was cut off, and this is one of the big kind of developments. But I think these are kind of two of the reasons for kind of relative optimism compared to last year, is that Ukraine is now a quite capable middle strike capability right now, whereas and you kind of divide it into different kind of groups. I think Fedorov, he tweeted and I think he termed middle strike anything from like 30 to 150 kilometers past the front line.
Okay, fine.
I think that was his number. I might be wrong.
Okay.
I kind of would say middle strike is maybe anything more than 30 kilometers past the front line, and I would kind of include all the occupied areas, right? I'd say all this is kind of operational at depth, middle strike capability, right? Maybe that's wrong. I would include Crimea too. Again, maybe that's not true, but like that's my view. But what I would say is, development of FP2s, these kind of big kamikaze drones, like 100 kilogram warheads, other things like Bulava, Ram 2X, the Hornet, other kind of middle strike drones. Some of these have small warheads that can hit a truck, but nothing bigger than that. But the quantities are increasing quite significantly. The quality is increasing too. And right now, Russia doesn't have a good answer to this, right? And we saw the last 5 months, a significant number of Russian air defense systems have been hit by FP2s or Bulava or so on, at quite significant ranges. But not just that, we're seeing hits on command posts, on warehouses, on logistics depots. On
maybe will correct you a little bit. I'm not sure that whether we are striking a lot of command posts right now, because that's my opinion. I have no facts, but the problem is that Russian command posts, even battalion level, they are deep underground. And honestly, with this quality of warhead for our drones, even for FP or German one or whatever kind of drones, seems like it's not very possible to penetrate this.
Okay.
Maybe that's why we are destroying so much air defense systems that won't be able to cover this area.
Okay.
And it means that we'll be able to use our aviation more. Because if you want to destroy Russian regiment command post, you need to use British or French crucial missiles,
right?
A couple of them at least, and then this one is destroyed, seriously damaged, or it cannot operate anymore. Maybe that's the things why we are destroying so much air defense system, because as I said, it's not 2022 where Russians place their HQs in restaurants and,
right.
2-store, 3-store buildings. It's right now deeply underground, and it's quite hard to penetrate at least with drones.
Yeah. So what do you think the implications are of the middle strike campaign? Like what effect do you think it's going to have on the battlefield itself?
I can assume it's going to be a huge effect. We may say that Russians will adapt to that, but the question is when and with what kind of price, and what they will lose if they adapt. Because you cannot adapt literally to everything. For example, I mentioned air defense systems. So also, for example, radar system, like for example, P-18 radar.
Right.
So it's able to cover some kind of area, like I don't know, like be 60 kilometers. So it has some kind of tasks. If you destroy it or target it, so they have two variants: to continue staying in this area, plus minus a couple of kilometers,
right,
and being destroyed again, or to move deep. If you move deep, you're already losing and missing something. Same with air defense. In terms of ammunition depots, fuel depots, warehouses in general, all the stuff that we are striking right now, same here. They used to place all of that at the depth of 60, 80 kilometers. That's not reachable for HIMARS. Right now it's like 120. I think we'll force them to place them at least 200 kilometers from the front line. And in some cases, they're already moving those warehouses to Russia,
right,
where they think they have better protection. All of this helps us to kind of win some kind of time for better preparation. And the logistics suffers. I mean, the trucks are suffering, and for example, ammunition depots are suffering. It means that you're not able to do supplement, rotation. It requires much more time. It requires much more fuel, and fuel also is being targeted.
Right.
So this will create a much broader problem for them, because sustainability of your defense of the army, of any army. It's not just about whether you're killing enemy soldiers. Maybe you are able to stop the enemy's advance, but the best thing is to combine, and we are finally combining.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see much more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the effects, again, it's I like to compare it to like a year ago, right? A year ago, Ukraine has always had pretty good intelligence on where Russian targets are.
Yeah, with the help of Western allies, yes.
Yes. And yes, the other reasons for optimism is that Western support for Ukraine has gotten better, right? Because in the beginning, it was we had to create new structures entirely. The trust is not there. Maybe there's still trust issues based on what some foreign politicians say about Ukraine.
Yeah,
there still is that issue, but the connections between Western militaries, intelligence agencies, and Ukrainian ones has improved dramatically. Like the targeting process has become more sophisticated, the relationships become more mature, and so a lot of the things has improved a lot. I think for middle strike, and compared to a year ago, right? Russian logistics were easier to operate a year ago, just significantly easier.
Absolutely.
You can move trucks much closer to the front line. You can't do that easily now.
Approximately 20 kilometers, you are fine in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and so that's not safe anymore. So I mean, again, they're going to adapt. They always do adapt, but the adaptations will make them less effective, less efficient, right? And so they're already moving fuel back further from the front line, right? Logistics get moved back further from the front line. You have to use more trucks or smaller trucks or ATVs instead, right?
You need to cover also them.
Right. So all those things become a bigger issue. He said you need EW, counter-UAS teams, you need air defense teams. These are all guys who cannot be assaultmen and other things, right, to kind of supply this. All that's going to become more difficult. And this is going to make offensive operations more difficult for Russia. But also, like, I mean, it gives better prospects for Ukraine to do offensive operations because you can try to isolate areas by doing operational strikes. You can degrade logistics in a part of the front line, and then try and kind of isolate, brigades on the front line and say, okay, we're gonna make logistics very difficult for this one or two brigades, and that could set conditions for successful offensive operations. Again, not saying Ukraine is going to drive to Crimea or something like that, but when you look back at Kupiansk-Multipliers, the operations were successful. They could have gone far better though, right? There was opportunities for improvement, and again, another reason for optimism is that it demonstrated that Russian lines are not that strong. There are vulnerabilities there.
Sorry, they don't have defense line as it used to be like during summer counteroffensive in 2023. They have like 3 defense lines.
Right.
But now it's like a thin line and nothing is behind. Mostly.
You have the initial line of infantry. Right? The infantry don't have much in the way of anti-tank weapons. And again, their entire concept is we have to go forward. We have a timeline. We have to advance forward, right, based on political kind of objectives. Mm-hmm. And so they're entirely focused on an offensive. And so the initial line are guys who are using it as a jump off position to go further. And you have positions behind them, but that's like dugouts to support offensive operations, not defensive. And basically the defenses are held by UAV teams, right? It's Mavic teams, FPV teams. It's the assumption that Ukraine tries to do offensive, we can stop it with FPVs, Molnia, Mavics, right? What have you. If you target those teams, if you knock out logistics of those teams, if you suppress those teams, right, then actually the Russian lines are not that strong. You can actually use armor again. You can push them back. Now, it requires planning, preparation. It requires, forces. And obviously, Ukrainian brigades are undermanned. Obviously, you have a variety of these problems. But the opportunity is there. And again, I think that, the Huyapoy operation itself, so obviously, Ukraine didn't take back Huyapoy. I'm saying the area that was north of Huyapoy, like Ternova, so on. But it could have gone better, and they could have really achieved a real breakthrough instead of like a kind of deep breach, right? And so, how do you predict what's going to happen this year? It's hard to say, of course, but I would not be, as you said, surprised that Ukraine pushes back Russia in some directions. We might see a case where Russia's advancing in one direction, Ukraine is advancing in a different direction. But I think the conditions are there. I think the issue of lying internally in the Russian military is a strong vulnerability. It can be exploited. I think the development of middle strike is increasing problems for Russia. I think, at the end of the year, and look, there are still real risks. There are still risks that Russians are going to climb towards Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, right? They're approaching the high ground. Once they have the high ground, it becomes easier to use UAS. It becomes easier to kind of move in that direction. That's still a big concern. It's still a big concern, that Russian forces are not far from Zaporizhia. They're not far from Kharkiv. Okay, they're not advancing in Kharkiv really, but they're not far from it. And these are still, problems that, when the war ends, if the front line is close to important Ukrainian cities, this is a big challenge and problem for Ukraine. And of course, we know that if Russia advances close to Kramatorsk-Slovyansk, they'll see more FPVs, more artillery strikes, more cabs, all these kind of things. And civilian casualties will increase. Civilians will have to leave to get forced out. So these are the kind of still real important kind of considerations this year. But I would say my view is I think, there's reasons to believe the situation is better this year than it was last year. And that there's reason to believe that Russia will have more difficulties advancing this year than last year. That's my perspective. It's hard to predict things more than a few months in advance because things change quite dramatically. But a couple of the reasons why I'm somewhat optimistic. One is the innovation advantage. I think Ukraine has it. I don't think Ukraine's going to lose it. I think the Ukraine defense companies, many of them are very new companies. They've existed for a year or two, right, or 3 years maybe. The drone companies, they're becoming more mature, right? So initially, it's like we have some very smart IT experts who don't have a background in business or defense, trying to create a product, trying to get funding, trying to get the ecosystem, right? That ecosystem is more sophisticated now. There's Western funds coming here.
Yeah.
Western governments are doing better support too, because they're doing targeted support, right? So funding a unit, funding a company, funding a capability. That targeted support, I think, is becoming very, very effective. I think a lot of Western countries are doing a very good job in that respect. I think Western countries have a better understanding of Ukraine and like the strengths
how it works here,
yes.
because it's not what like you do, what you have. And I just hope that they will support not just some kind of units, maybe some kind of course, because Army Corps should have ability to do maneuvers, to defend itself, not just one kind of brigade, regiment, or battalion. So I hope it's going to happen. So the short conclusion of that is that you need to have a goal, proper planning, reconnaissance, and responsibility. I mean, one guy who will be responsible for the operation, not the main guy, but just maybe some kind of colonel or some brigade general or something like that. And then we know how to deal with drones. It's not just about interception. And I believe that we mentioned today multiple times that we will see maneuvers again. It's going to happen. But please do not accept that it's going to be like Robotino 2.0. Nope. It's a much smaller way, but we will see those stuff that it wasn't done by anyone else before.
Yeah.
We will see like usage of different kind of technologies.
Well, and again, there's a bunch of other topics I want to get into, but we've been talking for a while. So
sure.
And we'll save for another day. But the assault forces concept, it is new, right? Of how to use drones, how do you fight in a drone environment? How do you do offensive operations in a drone environment, counter UAS, offensive UAS? But the system is being tinkered with, and people are figuring out how to do this. And Ukrainian units are innovating, and I think there's a better chance of seeing Ukrainian units achieve a breakthrough than Russian units, because the tinkering is happening more on the Ukrainian side. I think the development's happening more, despite the manpower problems. I also think that Western defense companies have finally realized Ukraine is the incubator for everything, right? If you want to test a weapon in combat kind of environment, you can only do it in Russia and Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
If you want to test a UAV in a real EW environment, a peer conflict, you can only do it in like the Donetsk region, right? In particular,
mostly there. Yeah.
And even like some parts of the front line are far worse than others too. And so EW that works or a UAV that works in Zaporizhia may not work in Pokrovsk and elsewhere, right?
Yeah, because of frequencies and different kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I think that we're seeing is Western defense companies who are bringing over important technology, not necessarily the system itself, but like a component of technology that can be integrated into Ukrainian drones or Ukrainian other developments. And the combination of Ukrainian and Western innovation, I think, is a really potent combination that Russia cannot compete with. And you've got Ukrainian companies that are more mature. The innovation is still there. They're being funded properly. As long as they're being funded properly, I think the innovation will just continue at a pace. I don't think Russia's system can kind of like compensate in this respect. And so there will be more adaptation cycles in this war, I just think Ukraine is going to retain this kind of innovation advantage as we go forward. And look, I think we get to the end of the year, Ukrainian capabilities in middle strike and deep strike keep expanding. I think what it's going to mean is that if Russia's struggling to protect things in Crimea, right, like their military facilities, their other things, at some point, right, Russia maybe lose leverage, right, and an eventual like peace deal, whatever. Okay, the front line may move further into Ukrainian territory, but if Russia can't protect Crimea, then does it really, end the war in a stronger position? Because in the beginning of the war, Ukraine could not do anything to Crimea,
Yeah.
and now, Crimea, is repeatedly being struck by targets. Black Sea Fleet headquarters is already
On a monthly
struck.
basis.
Exactly. I mean, the Black Sea Fleet is in Novorossiysk. It's not in Sevastopol. And so anyway, I think there's, I think Russia risks, overextending itself and getting to a position where, again, there's a lot of conversation about have we reached a turning point in the war? What does this turning point mean, et cetera. I'm not going to go that far. I will say that there are reasons to believe the situation is better now than it was a year ago. And there are reasons for cautious optimism about certain developments. And I think some of these things Ukraine will maintain this advantage. And so I think going into the rest of the year, I think there's some reasons for optimism.
Yeah, that's a very decent conclusion of what we have right now at the front line.
But we'll come back. We'll talk about some of these things in greater depth later.
Yeah.
And then we're going to continue doing longer conversations about Ukrainian military history topics, Russian military, modern warfare topics, technology, a variety of other things as well.
Yeah, we will try to do that at least.
All right, great talking to you. All right, talk to you later.
See you.
So thank you for listening to this episode of the Ukraine Military History Podcast. I promised you at the beginning that I'd tell you more about our sponsors. If you'd like to find a way to support the Ukraine Military History Podcast, the Borderlands Foundation more broadly, or if you'd like to work with myself and the contributors, the editors, and the guests that come on this show. So this podcast is produced by the Borderlands Foundation. The Borderlands Foundation has two main initiatives. Our mission at the Borderlands Foundation, it was founded right after the war started in 2022, is to make sure that Ukraine's heroes are never forgotten. And there's two things that I'm passionate about helping Ukraine do. Number one is build a strong future for Ukraine, for my family that I'm raising here in Ukraine, through national military history study and education. I believe that nations, great nations, are founded and sustained and grow in strength based on the stories that those nations believe together about their history. And Ukraine has had a very complicated history. It's a very old country. A lot of people don't understand that Ukraine's 500 years older than actually Russia, as Ukraine was around before Russia. Ukraine was founded by Vikings that moved to this part of the world in the 8th and 9th century and were traders and became rulers of the local Slavic people. So Ukraine, Kievan Rus, was an ancient and the most powerful empire in Europe. And Ukraine's history is very controversial. Through the years, Russia has appropriated it, stolen it, called it their own, and then tried to change Ukrainian history to make it their own, this great rich heritage that Ukraine has. So our mission at the Ukraine Military History Institute is go back through history and reclaim Ukraine's great military history tradition, because Ukraine's military history tradition encompasses almost all the great military traditions in the world. It started out interfacing and competing with the Vikings as well as Constantinople, absorbed those traditions over the years. It became part of the Russian military history tradition, the great Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and then the Ottoman, Mongol, kind of Crimean Tatar heritage of Genghis Khan's great military tradition, all fused, competed, and created this unique military history tradition inside Ukraine, which I call the Ukrainian Cossack military history tradition, which takes from Western military history, the German, English, American Mission Command, NATO Mission Command School, as well as the good things, hopefully, and leaves the bad from the Russian school, deep battle, and a lot of the positive things that have come out of the Russian military history tradition. And our mission is to help with the world's best military history center studying the current war, going all the way back into history throughout Ukraine's history, starting battles from World War II that were fought in Ukraine, World War I, the first Ukrainian independence period from 1917 through the Russian Civil War in 1921, back to the Cossack period, all the way back. Ukraine has a great and unique style of fighting and tradition of fighting. The first written constitution was written by Ukrainian Cossack class. The warrior class wrote down the first Declaration of Rights in history, in modern history, which founded the Enlightenment, led to the American Declaration of Bill of Rights, the Polish Constitution, and a number of other declarations of rights and constitutions since then were all inspired first by Ukraine's Declaration of the Rights with Pep Orlok after the defeat at Poltava at the hands of Peter the Great. So understanding Ukraine's military history tradition is a passion of ours. And every author who comes on this episode who publishes a written work, we're actually paying those authors. So if you want to donate to support the authors, you can donate to get access to anything that's been published in the Ukraine Military History membership site, which we're going to be releasing soon, where people who write about the current war or things from the past in Ukrainian military history, or some military historical case study that can help Ukraine think about how to fight and win and innovate in the current war, all those authors are getting paid by the center. I want to encourage great scholarship by paying Ukrainians to write their own history, and other people want to contribute to pay them to build this body of work and knowledge at the Ukraine Military History Institute. So when you donate to support this podcast, we have production costs. It helps us pay the author that we come on and interview about what they've written or what they've done, and then also just pays for all the production costs, the social media, the distribution, and everything that you enjoy about this podcast. So that's the first way you can support the center. The second big way you can support the center is we have and are building a Heroes of Ukraine tour, which is going to be a custom program that we're developing, which takes people who want to come in and see the battlefields of Ukraine from the current war that have been liberated. We can take you to different battlefield sites. The Battle of Kiev, which we've studied very well and have a lot of material, people who've studied that and can show that to you. Or if you want to go out to other sites, battles that have in territory that's been liberated in Kherson or Zaporizhia or other places out in Sumy or Kharkiv province, we can take you around to those sites. This is something we're developing. We want to launch this if and when the full-scale fighting with Russia pauses. We believe this could be a much bigger tour that people can come on a tour just buying individual seats, and over a couple of weeks meet people from all over the world who want to see Ukraine. But before we do that public version of the tour where anyone can book any number of seats at scheduled times, if any of you would like to have a tour of the battlefields of Ukraine that have already been liberated and are safe, we don't do war tourism to active parts of the fighting, but we do tours, historical staff ride battlefield tours for military professionals, government officials, and or business leaders that would like to understand what has happened here. You can contact us about the Heroes of Ukraine tour. So that's the Ukraine Military History Institute, which pays for and produces this podcast. The next sponsor I'd like to discuss is the Ukraine Center for Traumatic Stress. This is a center that is near and dear to my heart because of my past service in combat as a soldier, my study of history and the history of psychological trauma that comes from serving in combat, personal experience of my own, overcoming my own struggles with it, is a center dedicated to helping advance the research conversation and funding of breakthrough technologies and treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, which affects a number of soldiers who've served in Ukraine. And we want to make sure that they recover psychologically to become productive, vibrant leaders in the future of Ukraine. This is headed by Major General Vladislav Klochkov, retired, the former commander, the first commander of the Moral Psychological Support Forces of Ukraine under the Commander-in-Chief, President Valery Zaluzhny. It was a new position that he created right before the full-scale invasion. And General Klochkov has written his PhD on military psychology of a soldier and is passionate about advancing the study and the treatment of this disorder for Ukrainian veterans. This is a podcast that we're going to be releasing very soon in Ukrainian, translated into English for those who are not Ukrainian that want to listen in on the conversation and comment on it on our social media. But the interviews will be conducted in Ukrainian to advance and start the conversation for Ukrainian veterans, mental health professionals, and government officials who are working on this problem, which we believe is critical to solve for the future of Ukraine. So if you'd like to donate to support that podcast, to help us produce and start that conversation, or if you'd like to inquire about donating to supporting specific veterans going through different treatments, workshops for treatment of PTSD, you're welcome to reach out to us. The center also has a rehabilitation through golf program where we pay for Ukrainian veterans to play golf and go play in our annual Heroes of Ukraine Freedom Summit Golf Tournament, which will be held next year in Dallas in the United States in March. And this is a very important program that you can also take a look at sponsoring veterans in their journey to mental health recovering. So that's the Ukraine Center for Traumatic Stress. And then finally, for those of you who watch this podcast, that you see our co-hosts, some of the guests that come on there, all of our podcasts are filmed in Ukraine. The reason we do this is I believe in talking to Ukrainians and people who will actually come to Ukraine that want to speak about Ukrainian military history, analysis of the current war, defense industry issues, all the things that we need to learn in Ukraine and our allies in NATO who've supported Ukraine to fight and win the next war against our adversaries, Russia, China, Iran. All of the people that support Vladimir Putin are learning from this war the lessons that Russia's learning. We need to make sure that we learn the lessons from the war that Ukrainians are learning better and implement those across the force for our partner forces, Americans, British, all the other European NATO forces, partners out east, Japan, South Korea, Australia, all the countries that are supporting Ukraine. We want to make sure that we create a community that disseminates those lessons. And we get contacted by different groups, sometimes governments, foreign militaries that would like advisory services to help them learn and implement the lessons of this war for their armed forces, defense companies who reach out and would like to get help developing, testing their product, selling their product inside Ukraine that may be helpful on the battlefield. That's what the Borderlands Group does. We advise defense tech companies. We even do forward support engineering for defense tech companies, software development, hardware, hiring and staffing, a forward deployed engineering shop for Western defense companies. So all those services, if you're looking for advisory services, custom analytical studies by Rob Lee and his team, defense advisory services for defense companies or foreign militaries, we can put together a package for you, give you a proposal, and help you with that. So to get in touch with us, just go to the website for theborderlandsgroup.com, fill out our contact us form. We'll evaluate your request and get back to you in the appropriate secure communication channel if that's what you'd like to do. So thank you for watching the sponsor reads here. It's important to me that we provide value to you in every podcast episode, and these are the ways that you can support us so we can continue to afford to produce and expand and increase the frequency of our content production for the benefit of Ukraine and its allies fighting this war, winning this war, and the next.